Hello, I'm Kalpana Singhal, Editor-in-Chief CXO TV from Techplus Media. I'm highly delighted to welcome you all in this fireside chat on accelerating IT modernization. While most organizations have implemented specific software as a service solutions or adopted a cloud-first strategy for new systems, many are struggling to get the full value of moving the bulk of their enterprise systems to the cloud. This is because companies tend to fall into the trap of confusing simply moving IT systems to the cloud with the transformational strategy needed to get the full value of the cloud. Just taking legacy applications and moving them to the cloud, lift and shift will not automatically yield the benefits that cloud infrastructure and systems can provide. In fact, in some cases, that approach can result in IT architectures that are more complex, cumbersome, and costly than before. This fireside chat is focused on discovering the strategy and approach to deliver your infrastructure while offering the flexibility, observability, and growth business demands today. Please allow me welcome Vinod Sivarama Krishnan, CIO in the Stars, as our esteemed speaker, and Amit Didolkar, Regional Sales Director, Citrix Systems, as moderator of the fireside chat. Please accept my gratitude for being with us. With this, I would request Amit to please take this over and start the fireside chat.
Thank you, Kalpana, for the introductions, and thank you, Vinod, for accepting our invitation to be a part of this chat. All of us have seen some level of transformations over the last few years. First, with regards infrastructure modernization, I think a significant set of decisions early on fundamental frameworks for infrastructure. The choices essentially being between on-premises, making a choice of the hyperscalers. And I think that is now evolved into a fairly mature set of decision-making parameters and variables across all organizations. Over the last few years, we've also seen a significant number of applications being replatformed to the cloud and potentially back as well, as organizations such as yours have gone through this journey of really understanding what works for them, both from a value perspective, also from an agility perspective, and a price performance point of view. We at Citrix, of course, have been in conversations and in the thick of the action with a lot of our customers, primarily because the application delivery, as well as security wrapper around application delivery, is something that is integral to what we provide as solutions to our customers. And we have an interesting set of observations and experiences as a result of doing it across a disparate set of customers, across verticals, including replatforming legacy systems of record type applications into the cloud. And I hope to discuss that over the next half an hour with you, Vinod. So thank you for making time. And let me just tee this off by essentially just asking you to recount what your journey has been so far, maybe over the last 5 years in terms of modernization initiatives. And then we'll potentially dig a little deeper into some of those specific aspects just to understand from a practitioner and a management perspective, how is it that you have evaluated this modernization journey?
I think, very pointedly, the question you ask about application modernization is not a simple, cookie cutter approach, unfortunately. I think a lot of the times when you look at legacy and how legacy evolves by, business growth. And you reach a point, obviously, when the application is no longer fit for purpose, not because it doesn't work anymore, but because the challenges of maintaining scalability, of maintaining performance exceed, if you will, the day-to-day benefits that you reap from that system, or that system occupies that very critical sweet spot in the organizational, process execution, that it becomes important for us to consider doing something. Now, especially if you look at a complex environment with multi-platform, or for instance, we have engineered systems where we take multiple systems on that. Now, the answers sometimes, at least the technical answers, are not so obvious. One very good thing is that there are multiple paths open. As you mentioned, now you have the hyperscalers on the one side, you have the private hybrid options on the other. And of course, you continue to have a very robust option in terms of existing engineered systems and on-premise base. And curiously, I'll narrate an incident where when we lifted one application from an engineered system, we actually made the choice for the other one because the resulting capacity and the need to offset our costs and sweat our assets made it a more logical choice to take the second application and expand the space to keep it on-prem. Something that we could not have done. And this is what I mean by the dependencies in a complex environment that govern these choices. Eventually, I think the responsibility to ensure that you have a path to protection of investment. As you correctly mentioned, there is a level of replatforming also that happens, and reverse replatforming as well, because especially when you deal with niche hyperscalers, not everything is really as elastic as you look at it. Yeah. And we had this very successful application that was actually successful beyond our expectations. We started with a point functionality application that very quickly started spreading base. And over, I would say, 6 months went from being a niche application in our landscape to something that was significantly mainstream with a cost impact in the region of nearly 1,000 crores. Now, certainly it became much more important for us to ensure performance at a level that even a hyperscaler couldn't give us. Especially because we were in a niche hyperscaler that didn't have the same level of process management that somebody had. We looked at it, we said, should we shift it to another hyperscaler? And the answer that kept staring us in the face was bring it back. Because we need it and we can. And surprise, surprise, we did that and it's working very well for us.
Yep.
So I think, when you look at these 3-4 considerations of scalability, of what you have left in your environment, and to an extent the need to sweat your assets and to, if you will, expend what you invested in, because I think not all of us have the luxury of shrugging off our investments halfway through their useful lives because something new came up. So I think that is really the complex interplay, and therefore, to get back to my original point, this is very much a case-to-case decision. I think one of the key determinants also for us of application modernization is, and when you look at industries like mine or retail or utilities, these are businesses where my usual joke is, you heard of changing the tires while the car is moving. In these cases, it's almost changing the engine while the cars are moving, because when there's a very healthy appetite for business change, there's a huge inertia in these scale systems. Indus has 180,000 towers. Making changes to our core platforms impact tens of thousands of people almost immediately. So, we kind of take these calls very judiciously. When to mess with this is, I think, a very delicate call. How to mess with it is completely another one in terms of how we string out the actual implementations. But to answer, and I hope I've answered the main point, that this is actually one of those things where you look at it case by case, and it is not a very complex model, but it's certainly not intuitive. So, it's a function of what you have left, where do you have it, and we have some very agonized discussions internally, where we have strong views back and forth. But I would say eventually it is a combination of commercial and technical factors that give us the confidence to say this is what we need.
Yeah. No, and Vinod, thanks for that. I think speaking from experience, especially of an experience where you have moved to the cloud and have had a certain set of parameters determine to move back on premises is a great story. Because a lot of people who are in this decision-making process are always faced with the peer pressure, if you will, of moving everything to the cloud. The world is doing it. Why am I not doing it? And there are mature organizations who have a set of variables that are evaluated on the impact analysis of what that move means, not just from a technology perspective, but also from a business point of view. What is the change management involved? Is there a process change involved? And just a lift and shift sometimes is proved to be fairly disastrous for a lot of organizations. Yeah. I think if one were to compile a case study of lift and shift disaster, it would be as impressive as successes of moving to the cloud. And thanks for sharing that. I think some of those variables are something that people who are listening to this fireside chat will definitely value in terms of how, especially in an environment as complex as yours, you've made some of those decisions. So thanks for sharing that. In terms of your outlook, and purely from understanding how you plan for this, how are you balancing investing in modern technologies and modernizing your current landscape, whether it is re-platform the application or whether it is a complete rewrite? For example, a lot of legacy code is now available in new formats which are more scalable, moving to a container Kubernetes type deployment, which is what a lot of ISVs are also moving to in their newer versions. How are you planning for this? How are you, maximizing your investments and at the same time balancing how do you keep the lights on what's really critical, important, and looking at expanding the application landscape as it gets more denser?
So I'll answer this specifically to Indus, but I'll also give you a more general perspective. And the way that we look at it, and Indus is one of the largest transaction processing companies in the country that you didn't know about. Because with 180,000 towers and a largely outsourced model, if you just look at PR, PO, work confirmation, invoice payment, you probably process a staggering number of transactions. Add to this the fact that we pay 180,000 electricity bills a month, rental to 70,000 landlords a month, not all of it in one shot, some of it distributed, GST against all of these, and huge material movements, because each of these 180,000 sites has something like 30-40 pieces of equipment, that gets refurbished and maintained and so on.
Yep.
So in this scenario, basically the way that we look at new technology, there are a lot of digitization opportunities that continue to remain. Things that have been historically field-based or people-based, where we reevaluate these, but the momentum of the organization is such that we have to look at them carefully. Now, every once in a while, there will come along a technology that is absolutely suited to solving one or the other of these factories. And I'll give you an example. In our electricity bill payment process, that technology was OCR plus RPA. So, there's a process. So if you looked at these, it's fascinating. We work with 70 discoms, and in some cases you get the bill, in a nice Excel file of a format we are choosing on your email. And in some cases, a guy has to hop on a bike, drive 20 kilometers a site and fish it out of the meter box and bring it back to somebody who enters it in a system.
Yeah.
You have the gamut there. But then you come up with technologies like RPA with OCR that are disruptive in this sense. And then now, the choice that comes to a person like me is what platform do we put it on?
Correct.
Do we build this as a layering on one of our existing platforms? But there's a powerful case because you have the base infrastructure. You have, as I said earlier, the argument of sweating the assets. You have all of these good things going. At the same time, you're like, how well does that technology work with this platform? And is it going to make it harder to integrate because you chose that platform? And you have no shortage of horror stories. The market of partners that threw their hands up after promising you it was a slam dunk. So one really has to be kind of careful with this piece. Now, our own approach has been that wherever this opportunity presents itself to inject new technology that is not raw, bleeding edge new, but that is promising and proven. And, despite our size and scale, we still end up doing 20 odd POCs a year.
Wow. Yeah.
It kills the team because it's extra work. But,
Correct.
Every once in a while, we come up with something that justifies the pain by being the right answer. And so, for instance, we tend to err on the side of getting the new platform in, because layering is always an option.
Yep.
If what you've done is a disaster, the layering option presents itself at any point in time. We'd much rather establish the new piece. Now, one very interesting thing is in our scope, we actually have the ability to apply the new technology to multiple use cases. So we get a platform-based benefit, so to speak. So when I say RPA, OCR, while I started it for electricity bills, I'm doing it for 25 other things in the company today. Lease documents for property rentals. So if you understand, there is a nucleus around the digitization of our factories, which a technology unlocks. Often we will bring it into the company through one use case, but then it becomes part of our arsenal. And the next use case that turns up, one of my guys is like, so this can go on that one. And to my mind, the investment in new technologies is absolutely paramount, because otherwise you get deeper and deeper into technology debt in places that you recognize you're getting into debt.
Absolutely. Yeah. And great point. Actually, the platform point is great. There's probably one use case that gets a solution in, and then you're right, as people realize not just stated value, but also latent value from that solution, post facto, you realize this potentially unlock a significantly higher level of either productivity or value. It lends itself to many use cases. And to the last point you made of technology debt, very valid, because a lot of legacy applications in our experience as well don't lend themselves to integration with some of the modern applications. 3-4 years back, there was this new hot tech phrase that was bandied around, saying that now we are in an era, especially in enterprise deployments, which were termed, this is now the API economy, which is that if you have an API, you lend yourself naturally to better integration, regardless of the landscape that's sitting in there. And automation, of course, is one of the obvious benefits of having an API-led approach. Can you touch upon how you are looking at it, especially from APIs? And the reason why I ask this is because we get into this conversation, especially on application control, where a lot of our customers really are struggling with API management. They don't have an API strategy. Obviously, the application lends itself to having hooks that couple it with the overall landscape. And then we, of course, have to help them with not just managing that API, but also security around APIs, because once you have something that's programmable, it naturally lends itself to be breached or be abused, if you will.
It is an incredibly painful thing to integrate multiple systems to each other, of differing legacy, of differing technology, of differing platform. This is not fun. I mean, obviously APIs is technically the answer, but I think the devil is not in the technology as much as in the implementation.
Yep.
Reconciling database. Last year we did 200 CRs, change requests, across my 6 top platforms.
Wow.
If you can imagine the analysis of the impact of
every change request,
these changes on my interfaces,
yep.
This is like Rubik's Cube with some 10 dimensions or something. So, and even after you think you got it right, 2 years later, you'll realize that there was a hole somewhere, and, something's been accumulating there that needs to be cleaned up.
Correct. Yeah.
So I think, it's a very simplistic thing to say that we're in the API era. So if you look at how we thought about it, about 3 years back, we did a project we're very proud of, which is our DSS, our decision support system. We actually took every single one of our 20 top sources and integrated them, in a fairly complex but extremely solid Golden Gate, ODI, OBIE, Power BI visualization thing. And he said, we will expose every single data element that exists in this company. And it half killed us, but we did it. Now, what we came up with, to avoid integrations, we said, look, you have one integration primarily into your decision support system. And we came up with using the DSS as a kind of clearinghouse for this data.
Yep.
So what we said is, look, you have data from application A that you are bringing in and integrating with data from application B, and that helps you do exception identification. Now we've got basically automation anywhere and a lot of RPA techniques that you take this output and you feed it back into the source system of choice. So I'll give an example. I've issued POs to people that I shouldn't have issued based on the logic that I have. And I figure that out in my financial system of record. And I go back to my purchasing system and say, okay, I'm going to cancel these 20 POs. So basically taking a report out of my decision support system. I'm using a bot to enter that back into my sourcing system and simulating this action. Obviously, in a perfect world, it would be great if I could just make the underlying systems talk to each other. And I could. But maintaining that is going to kill me, whereas I know that I will always maintain my interfaces to my DSS because that's how my business runs, right? So now all I really have to bother about is application to DSS and managing that interface with the changes. It's not perhaps in that sense the most classically elegant way of doing it, but it makes huge sense to us because we limit the dimensions of our Rubik's Cube to, broadly a 2 by 2, and that pretty much we can solve.
Correct. Yeah. No, I agree. For simplification of that complex matrix is a giant project and undertaking itself, and some of it will have answers that will evolve as you continue to fine tune it.
We have a name for this strategy, and it's called closing the loop. So, because initially your DSS projects always start with exception reporting.
Correct.
And then you used to always rely on somebody going back and doing some action in some source system. And we said, you know what, we don't need you. Classically, we run these systems. There's no decision making involved. You've already made the decision when you made the logic of the report to say these are exceptions and these are the actions. So thank you very much and get out of the way. Now, at some point in time, we'll obviously try, depending on the criticality and the number of transactions, we'll probably try to do a system-to-system bridge. But this buys us tons of time. This buys us the flexibility to do this when we want to do it, rather than do it at gunpoint.
Correct. No, and that's a great example of something that is very, very complex, and not just complex, very sensitive as well, given that it probably is the bedrock of all the value that all the transactions and that are aggregated together. So clearly something that could potentially have snowballed out of control as well, if you will, given the number of variables that were involved in it. The other dimension, that I really wanted to pick your brain was on a lot of born in the cloud application use cases that are coming up, and we have seen a lot of these drivers essentially being around one, agility, because the business has something that needs a born in the cloud deployment. The second, of course, of it being flexible, especially from a scale perspective, and we've seen this especially for events that are massive spikes. From our perspective, a lot of it is enabled primarily with what we do on the application control side and on traffic shaping and things like that, which I think is the more complex part of essentially bridging on premises and cloud traffic. From your perspective, what's your experience been of really making that choice? Has there been, especially in the last couple of years, where there have been supply chain shortages on hardware and you can't really boot something up in the data center in 3 months because nobody's going to deliver something to you in 3 months, just not possible. And so multiple drivers to that. But fundamentally, from a business perspective, what's the experience been like on saying, okay, I need this in 2 months, let's do quick and dirty first, and then we'll see as it scales, but we want this to be agile.
Yeah. Absolutely the challenge of, scalability and flexibility, or even availability of resource at a point in time, is a challenge. But, I think the case is somewhat overstated for that when you say cloud is the answer. I'll give you a couple of reasons for that. Is that, nothing ever starts up at full scale.
Yep.
So your idea of full scale economics is, kind of something that comes post facto after you made the choice. And the second thing is what you gain in speed, you don't want to lose in terms of restrictions later or needing to deplatform later because you've hit multiple performance ceilings. At what point do you cross that divide where the interfacing of data back to you or to other systems, starts exceeding, if you will, the benefits you got from putting out in the cloud in the first place.
Correct.
So I think, the challenge really, and I'll come back, like a little bit of a broken record to my first question, is it a little bit of case to case. But also the point I want to make, and many CIOs don't make this point forcefully enough. CEOs assume that flexibility is a given, or that somehow flexibility actually doesn't cost much, or if it does cost, it should actually save money. In a business context, when you get flexible, you often end up saving some money. The truth is that in IT particularly, flexibility costs money.
Correct.
You're talking about redundant parts, you're talking about redundant hardware, you're talking about capacity that is in excess of your minimal usage. It is the enemy of optimization, and many of us have grown up on the culture of optimizing our resources, making do with what we have.
Correct. Yep.
So it's an alien concept when you talk about flexibility in that sense to, a management team. And I've always been one to argue that the cost of flexibility is very important to understand. So when you talk about an automatic scaler on cloud,
yep,
do you talk about the ability of the hyperscaler to actually dial you back with your usage? When you look at the fine print of the contract, you're responsible for a number of things which you have zero control over.
Correct.
In the cloud environment from a traffic point of view. A transaction retries because of some low latency link somewhere. And then you find that your system has been retrying the same transaction 200 times. You lost every little bit of benefit that you got from putting it in cloud in the first place.
Yep.
And I don't think many cloud management systems have that level of sophistication. The structures are still somewhat opaque, despite claims to the contrary. And sure, they've evolved a lot, but then there's a question of opaqueness, lack of transparency, lack of understanding about what exactly you're paying for, and nobody's really giving you advice on how to tune that. Partly because they don't know, because in application level, you have the deployment, you have the code with you. There's nobody who's looking at both of these things at the same time. You are supposed to be doing that, but the minute you're in the hyperscaler, you have no visibility to half the data that you need to make that call. So I think, to me, it's much more a question of taking a measured call and, looking at the options you have. Often I've found that, something that you need in 2 months, you don't really need in 2 months. You want it in 2 months.
Yep.
You probably, by the time you've figured out the business logic and ironed out the first few loops and done your first few UATs, you've bought the time you need to make an informed decision on the platform. I think, often we jump to that conclusion that you have to do this. Frankly, I don't think so. Frankly, I think you do it the way you do any other project. You have a couple of options on the table. At a point when you believe you have sufficient information to make that call, you go for it. But that assumption that flexibility is what you need, I take that call very, very carefully.
And great point, Vinod. I think it's pretty much like an iceberg, especially on the economic side. What you see and assume at the beginning of the project will of course unravel as you scale, and there is truly a cost to flexibility, which is something that you don't realize till you actually hit that scale. Of course, the complexity of managing a hybrid environment, because and I'm assuming that you, like most others now, are multi-cloud.
Yeah.
There's no one who's wedded to a single hyperscaler and just one data center. You would have at least 2 data centers for redundancy, and then a couple of hyperscalers or more, surely for the services that they offer there. And managing all of this obviously has its own complexity and a trade-off. And to your point, a case-to-case basis evaluation of whether that flexibility is really important. Many times, some of these urgent rush requests are for use cases that are a once in a while.
Almost always.
Almost always the once in a while occurrence, which doesn't have any repeatability, and so if you get headfirst into it, you've essentially burnt a lot of cycles just for that single instance that would creep up maybe once a year. Yeah. So I just wanted to change tracks and go pretty much to the final segment of this chat, which is around security. A significant amount of work now is on ensuring that data is secure, that applications themselves are secure, and given that they are distributed in terms of deployment across many environments. And of course, it is paramount. I'm sure it is a priority for your board as well, because there is a significant amount of focus on ensuring security. How are you looking at it specifically, given the threat landscape today, especially, for example, on bot prevention and DDoS, something that will impact you first up, outside, of course, of the larger, more prevalent threats of ransomware and what have you?
So I think one part obviously is having the tool set. And Indus has always believed in robust level of investment in tool set. Because the nature of the business is such that we are very distributed partner environment. The last thing you want is data exposure between partners. I wouldn't like somebody who's doing a job for me in Rajasthan, for instance, to know how much I'm paying somebody to do the same job for me in Tamil Nadu. Equally, I work with multi-customer environment. So I am paranoid about not allowing customers to see each other's data, because we are enshrined. It is enshrined upon us to not allow that to happen.
Absolutely. Yep.
So a lot of our activity really goes into tool set, into security from a development perspective by design, into, for instance, in our Power BI visualization layer of our DSS, we're one of the few companies that employs row-level security at scale.
Okay.
So what that means is I have a report that my chief of supply chain sees, that 6 level below him as partner sees the same report, but everybody can just see what they're entitled to.
Wow. Okay.
Now there's a factory in terms of maintaining the names, but our risk of inadvertent access is low. If you understand what
absolutely I mean. Yes.
So one part is absolutely the tool set and making sure that we have the right tool set in place, whether it is data exfil, whether it is XDR, whether it is web firewall, whatever it is, it's really having the right tool set and implementing it right in the first place. The other is really a very, very robust process, education, training, consequence management operation. I have associates that work with me that are not on my roles that do important functions with data. An associate sends out an email with an Excel attachment without one of our company employees copied. 15 minutes, his or nominal manager in the system has an email. We've blocked the attachment. We've blocked the thing from going out.
Wow.
And the guy is getting a formatted mailer asking him to explain
why this is happening.
What do you think you're doing?
Yeah.
So one would warrant. One would believe this is a bit of an overreaction, but I think in our environment it's warranted. And therefore, what happens is this kind of thing serves as an amazing deterrent. Because the minute you do this, you don't have to do it that many times.
Yep.
Because people understand that this is not necessarily a pleasant experience. And 15% of those cases have valid business exigencies behind them. But the fact that we are stopping it and asking the question, I think, is so determinant of our approach to this thing that people actually look at and say, you know what, I don't want to mess with that. So, I think the combination is really both of these. And to us, it's actually one is useless without the other.
Yep.
Because you have to drive the behavior, you have to drive the tools. And the tools reinforce the behavior because they tell you what's wrong. And the behavior reinforces the tools because it tells you what you need to do, which gates do you need to close further.
Yep.
That's how we think about it.
No, excellent. I think that was great insight. Many often we focus on the tool set because we can. Because we can, and we believe that investment is going to solve all of our problems, and we kind of ignore the human element or the social engineering element of some of the possibilities that exist, which get reinforced by consequence management. I think that is it, you framed it perfectly in ensuring that both of these are practiced and conjointly and not standalone. You can't just talk about behavior and not have the tools to back that up. You can't have just the tools and all the investment that you will make in multiple security technologies and neglect the humans from understanding what the impact of their actions is. So I think very, very well put, Vinod. Thanks for sharing that. I think great to hear from you specifically as a practitioner, not just on the decision-making part of how you're looking at modernizing applications, but also from the operational side, specifically on what your experiences have been around IT modernization, both at an infrastructure as an application level. Some of the things that I think all of our viewers will take away is a stringent evaluation framework that will be the foundation of why they should look at modernizing applications, whether all of the variables that go into it, not just the technical ones on agility, flexibility, elasticity, are enough for people to make those decisions. Like you articulated specifically with your experiences and your examples, sometimes it's better to look at recasting what you have and simplifying it to yield better value and results for the business than just looking at a lift and shift, which you think is potentially going to be of benefit. Clearly, grass is not always greener on the other side. And finally, in summary, I think on the security side, a great set of practices that you have at Indus on conjoining investments in all of the technology and tools that you're using to provide a secure application and an access landscape with the human element that sometimes is usually the gaping hole in that security framework. Thank you very much, Vinod, for your time and for sharing your experiences with us. Loved the insight and specifically the examples that you have of your own journey over the last few years on this. Really appreciate. I'm sure our viewers will have a lot to learn from this exchange. Thank you very much.
For more updates from CXO TV, please like and subscribe to our channel.